Welcome to Leadership, the Secret Sauce with coaches Dave Lipsky and Matt Dodson, where we are delving into the realms of leadership and coaching. Join us as we sit down with remarkable leaders and coaches, uncovering their unique insights and strategies that make them truly exceptional. We'll explore the question, what is your secret sauce and when did you know? Unveiling the hidden ingredients behind their success. Are you ready? Well, let's get started. Before we begin, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Character Matters Coaching and Consulting, where they believe that your character is the compass guiding you through life's journey. Whether you're facing personal or professional challenges, they are dedicated to helping you discover and strengthen the core values that define who you are. Well, welcome to another exciting episode. Dave, what do we have on tap today?
I am very excited to welcome Rich into the conversation. Has such a varied background, and I'm always fascinated with people that are also connected to our military. My dad, biological dad, was a Navy guy on the Midway, and my stepdad, who raised me, fought in Korea. And I have a little dad garden out back to remember them both. So every time I take the dogs for a walk, I honor them. And I'm really fascinated. Like across the mountain from me where I live is West Point. So I get to see them practice jumping out of airplanes. So welcome, Rich. I'm excited to talk to you and learn a little bit more about some of your secret sauces of coaching.
Oh, thank you, David. I was actually just at West Point yesterday, believe it or not.
Well, next time stop by. You could look across the mountain. I'm on the other hill by the Woodbury Commons.
Sounds good.
So we like to start off with just an energy check-in. So on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, what's your energy level?
Oh, it's what an interesting question. I usually hover at least at an 8. So I'm pretty excited to be on this podcast, and it's Friday. So I'm never going to say a 10 because that would leave. I got to leave open the possibility for more. So I'm going to say I'm at a 9. How about that?
9 is good. And Matt, whereabouts are you?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say 8, just because I've had a few cups of coffee this morning, and yeah. So I think I'm a solid 8.
Yeah,
How about you, Dave?
I'm going like I
Eight
feel
point five.
I feel competitive this morning, so I'm going to go with like a 9.25.
Wow.
I don't know why. I'm not sure
Yeah.
why. Um, but
Nobody said we could do decimals. I feel like you guys left that out.
Yeah, we sandbagged that one. Yeah.
yeah, as soft scientists, we make up the metrics as we go along.
Fair enough.
So when you had said you were out in West Point recently, and you were traveling, whereabouts are you calling in from today?
So I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, a little town of Farragut, named after Admiral Farragut. So a nod to your Navy roots there, David. It's a little town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, in the eastern part of the state. It's my hometown. It's where I grew up and went to high school before I went off to West Point for college. And we moved back here in 2017 and came back home. So my parents are both living still here. I got two brothers live here, and my wife's family's from nearby. So we kind of consider this area home.
Awesome. It's nothing like being home. When you were on the plane in between the multiple delays to get back and forth to West Point, and somebody turned to you and said, so what do you do? How do you answer that question?
Well, I usually start with saying I'm retired military because I think usually people tend to find that interesting, and because our volunteer force is smaller, not everybody knows somebody who served in the military. Not everybody's like you, David, that had a father and then later a stepfather who both worked and served in the military, and I thank you for their service. I mean, it is amazing, the folks that, especially in combat situations like Korea, but. So I usually start with that. But what I do now, I'm an attorney, a lawyer. I was a judge advocate in the military after being an infantry officer coming out of West Point. So I served most of my military career as a military attorney. And I practiced law to quite a few times after the military, but I don't practice law right now. I still can. I've got an active license. I'm just choosing not to. What I do now is leadership development and coaching. The leadership development I do is through a company called Thayer Leadership, which is at West Point. We teach Army and West Point leadership techniques, tactics, and procedures and principles to civilian companies. And it's an absolute joy to do. And then as part of that job at Thayer, we often get asked if we'll do coaching. And so I've started. It's a growing side business for Thayer Leadership, and so for the last 2 years or so, I've been doing some executive and leadership coaching with them.
I know, Rich, we've talked about this once before, but and we do want to get to your secret sauce. But like, how would you describe the difference between sort of like, well, I'm really kind of curious, like how you have evolved as a coach, like having the military background and now being sort of in the leadership and executive coaching. Are they the same? Are they different? What did you notice about those?
No, Matt, that's a wonderful question. It's funny. There's what I thought was coaching, and there's what I now know to be coaching. So when I was coming up through the military, we always said, "Oh, we coach and mentor," folks who work for us. People ask us to do that, but it's almost always mentoring. It's giving advice, and here's what I would do here. And I don't know that I listened very much, honestly. And I, as a lawyer, I always listened very carefully when it came to, legal opinions and folks needing counsel and things like that. I was a very good listener. But I think when folks came to me for advice, I think I was, if I look back now, and maybe I'm being too hard on myself, but I think I was probably listening to respond. That classic opposite of Stephen Covey's rule, seek first to understand, then to be understood. I think I was seeking to be understood. And so it'd be interesting to go back and, and be able to watch or listen to myself coaching when probably what I was doing is giving advice. And so I think the big thing for me that's changed, having been trained now as a coach, is listening and asking good questions and letting the other person work through what they need to come to. And I still give advice. Don't get me wrong. I still will. But I ask permission. I'll say, hey, I usually don't get to that point. It usually gets to a point in a coaching session where somebody will say, what would you do? And I'll say, and I usually make sure we've first gotten through every possibility they can think of. But if they push and they ask, I'll say, well, if I can, let me give you my thoughts, what I would do in your situation. That's usually how I couch it.
That's really good. I think that's actually a really good differentiator, because I in sports, they're called coaches as well.
Yeah.
And they're really advice givers.
Yeah.
Or they're mentors. They've been there before. And that's just hard. I think it's a differentiation. And I think it's something that we have to explain as coaches.
We do.
Well, let's describe what it is. I think it's especially relevant in companies where we need to be super clear about what is coaching versus what is mentoring, and consulting, I think is probably. But Rich, what is your secret sauce?
Secret sauce as a leader or secret sauce as a coach?
Well, let's start with a coach. As a coach.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think my secret sauce has been just listening. I think the course I took through a guy named Andy Ramage in a company called Arete Way Coaching out of the UK, actually. One of the things he and his team of trainer coaches really stressed was listening, and the art of listening and paying attention and doing that, that paraphrasing, that summarizing, the playback, if you will, that some people call it. And I don't know that I always considered myself a fairly good listener. As an attorney, you have to listen carefully to what your clients are saying to you. Get the facts, make sure you've gotten every side of what's going on. Because if they don't tell you something and you give legal advice based on something and you haven't heard a critical fact, you're going to give bad advice. So I think early on I learned to do a pretty decent job listening, but I think I got really good at it. I hope anyway, through that coaching course. And so if there's a secret sauce to my coaching, I think it's the ability to just hang on every word of what that person has said and really pay attention and tune out everything that might be a distractor. Because I just think it's critical, and they can tell if you're listening or not. I think they get a sense sometimes. And so if there's a secret sauce to coaching, I think that's probably it for me.
Yeah. Say a little more about what would a client experience from your listening? What would they see you doing?
Well, they first of all, I think part of coaching is you've got to, you're actively listening. You're not just staring straight ahead, head not moving. There's some interaction. Your show, and it's harder on Zoom. It's a different environment, so you're making sure that they understand. You acknowledge what they're saying. You're doing some summary and summarizing and paraphrasing at the right points. You're not interrupting. I mean, one of the ways you can tell somebody's not listening is when they jump in and interrupt, and because they're just so desperate to interject that they're not paying attention to what you're saying. They just want to say what they want to say, and so I think a client picks up on that as well. So I think it's a very active style of listening, and then that as you do play back what you've said, I think that's where you really let them know that you've heard them. And then the other way that I don't know that we always think about as much is the good questions that follow. If you're listening well, then you're usually setting yourself up to ask good questions in response to what they've said, as opposed to you're just following some checklist script. And I think they can spot that as well.
My wife knows when I'm not listening. I thought I would
No,
just confess that right
100%.
here.
Wait, Matt. When does she know that you're not listening? What was that? Matt?
Well,
You were?
maybe
If
she
your
would
lips are moving.
notice. Yeah. I would say it's probably better to say it's when I am listening, she acknowledges it. That's to her credibility. So
You start
Yeah.
off with the words of apology in trying different languages. Like my
Yes.
latest is in Korean. Me and Hamida, I am sorry. What are you sorry for? Whatever it is that I didn't do. Thank you.
Mm.
So how did you said you have a sauce as a leader as well. What's your sauce as a leader versus a coach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my sauce as a leader might have been my sense of humor. I was kind of a class clown in high school. I was similar, I think, at West Point to the degree I could get away with it. I always kept a good sense of humor, and a lot of times in the military, things can get they can get tough. You're working long hours, but it's if you can be that little ray of sunshine sometimes in somebody's life and take some of the tension out of the situation. So I learned early on I could get under people's radar with a sense of humor and sometimes deliver some tough, bad news uh, with first softening somebody up with a sense of humor. One time, if I can give an example, I had a fairly senior commander. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but we were talking through a situation where they wanted to do something that I thought was kind of getting close to the line, and I just don't know that I was getting through to him. And I said, "Okay, sir, but if we go to jail, I get the top bunk." And he laughed and he said, "Okay, haha, very funny. All right, fine, we won't do it." And so from that point on, with that commander, anytime he would start to get bring up something that maybe we shouldn't be doing, I'd just look at him and say, "Top bunk, sir," and he'd say, "Okay, fine."
Nice.
Yeah, and what it did, not if you don't have you don't want to be artificially funny if you're not funny, and you don't want to be Michael Scott from The Office and be the goofball that's trying too hard. But if you can, I just found that there were times when appropriate and still respectful that you could just use a little bit of a sense of humor to in a tough situation and get kind of change the temperature in the room, get folks listening to you again, and so forth. So I learned to do that. I think that was part of it. I also knew very much when not to say anything. I would get in. I got invited to a lot of meetings. I made sure that if I didn't get invited, I found a way to get into that meeting because I think the lawyer's always got to be in these meetings. But I made sure also that I would sit quietly in the back of the room and not say a word unless I needed to, because the minute you start becoming this chatterbox, let me show you everything I know about everything, then after a while they're like, okay, don't invite Gross to the meeting, this is annoying. So I also learned you got to learn when. And so I think that was a skill as well.
Isn't that like to me, that's like the discernment in the sense of humor
Yeah.
world. Even in
Yes.
coaching, like how much can I make? Maybe I can make fun of myself, but as a client, I mean, if you're my client, I don't know. Maybe that takes some time. Maybe it takes years to be able to, even just to try something out there.
Yeah.
Um, you know, yeah,
Yeah. I don't usually, if I try to inject a little humor into a coaching session, it's usually at my own expense. Almost
yeah,
always. And that just again brings the kind of eases the tension, makes it kind of fun, shows some humility, and then they're like, okay, this guy's human too, and maybe I can
yeah,
tell him about this.
yeah. And then it gets me away from having to be like the expert. Well, you're the expert at leadership. Why don't you go ahead and tell me what I should do? Or you're like, that's not what
Yeah,
I'm here for.
yeah,
Yeah, you
exactly.
don't want my advice on that one. So
No.
yeah.
Yeah. How did you learn that asking questions and humor were your sauces?
Well, with the asking questions and I think that just evolved, as both from my legal practice and needing to know everything I mean, once you've given some bad advice based on not having all the facts, you only have to do that once very early on to realize that you've got to ask questions and listen and so forth. And then I think the coaching course I took really, really helped me learn that and to be intentional about it. I mean, it's one thing to think you're a good listener, but if you go into a session like, I mean, even this podcast, you guys are listening very intently. I can tell because you're recording a podcast, and it's important that you listen because you can't have an awkward moment where I've given an answer and you didn't. You're like, I'm sorry, what did you can't, I mean, you can't do that in a podcast. So you're being very intentionally a good listener here. And I'm doing the same thing. We don't have to, but we should. It's the same with a coaching session. I think you go in saying, okay, I'm going to focus for the next 30, 45, 60 minutes, and I am 100% on them and nothing else matters. And so I just think that intentionality is a huge part of that. With the sense of humor, it became very obvious very early that a sense of humor could diffuse a situation, and I could get away with stuff. I mean, I learned that as a plebe at West Point. A little bit in high school, perhaps, but especially as a plebe, if you had a sense of humor, sometimes you could diffuse situations. My last name is Gross, and it was a common phrase for upperclassmen to come up to plebes and say, "Mister, you're gross. You look, your shoes aren't shined, your uniform's a mess, or whatever." And I can't tell you how many awkward situations I got out of when an upperclassman who maybe didn't know me personally, so it had to be somebody who didn't know me, and they'd come up and they'd start, correcting my appearance or say, "Mister, you're gross." And I'd say, "Yes, sir, I was born that way." And they'd rear back like they're angry. And then they'd look down at my name tag and they say, "Oh, gross. That's funny. That's good. That's funny, gross." And they'd walk away. And I would have just diffused the situation. So
Mm.
instead of them staying and concentrating on me and seeing what else they could find wrong with my shoes or my haircut or whatever, they'd laugh and walk away and go mess with somebody else. So I learned that early on that a sense of humor could get me out of trouble, or maybe get me to change the dynamic of a
Mm.
situation pretty quickly.
I think actually the sense of humor is, I think, what is a lot of times our saving grace in a coaching situation, especially if you ask a question outside of like a known culture thing.
Yeah.
Like if I'm coaching people and I don't do it right, it's just as okay to just say, you know what, I need a lot of humor to
Yeah.
laugh at myself and for
Yeah.
whatever things that I've gone back and went, oh, someone just told me about something this week that I've just completely blown so many times in coaching um, a particular culture that I'm working with a lot. And I didn't know it. And so I was like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
that's all right. I can laugh at it and
It's
chalk
all
it up
good.
for
We can laugh
development.
if we can't laugh at ourselves.
Yeah.
Life's just not a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always kid. I was raised on sarcasm. I would have been taller, and then one of the was working at Sony. The head of HR said, yeah, Dave, you need to cut the sarcasm a little bit because it's just making people feel uncomfortable. And I was like, really? It is? And he said, it's taking away your power too. What? Like I have power? And it was kind of interesting because I kind of like,
Which was a sarcastic remark,
it
by the way.
was a very sarcastic. Thank you very much. It was very sarcastic, and I felt like he was baiting me into being sarcastic. Just
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
But what my lesson was timing, like
Oh,
right.
100%.
It's and I was like, I need to work on when.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you try to be funny in every conversation all the time and be the center of attention and the class clown, you got to leave that in high school. That doesn't work in a professional environment, and you just have to know, you know, when it's appropriate, and most of the time it's probably not, or at least, and you just get to know that. Now, what I'm currently doing, for example, the leadership development training I do, I had a 3 hour session yesterday where I taught a group of professionals about how to their values and who they were as leaders and their identity as leaders and how to write a leadership philosophy that they can use and so forth. So we spent about 3 hours on that. And I interject humor throughout. I don't tell jokes or I don't plan. I just I make fun of myself. I make little off the cuff comments just to keep it fun. And in that kind of environment where people are sitting with you for 3 hours, you've got to be, you got to keep. I think you got to keep it a little more entertaining. It's probably more appropriate there than it is, in a one-on-one coaching session about a very serious topic. So you just have to know, and it sounds like the two of you definitely do, especially after that HR conversation you had, Dave.
Yeah, it just depends. My like relatives probably not. Maybe
Probably
maybe
not.
at work.
They're
We
fair
stayed
game.
stayed employed. Who
Yeah.
who would you like to coach you?
Oh wow, what a great question. I tell you, I read the book. Christian Van Nieuwenberg has written kind of the book on coaching. I think it'd be pretty cool to have him coach me, just to see how somebody whose whole life is dedicated to coaching would do it. The guy who taught my course, Andy Ramage, he's so super busy and in such demand, but he would be, I think, pretty cool to have as a coach over he as part of the course, he gave each one of us a 30-minute coaching session, and it was pretty good. But he asked at the beginning, do you want advice or do you want to be coached? And I said, I want advice. I want to hear how you do this. And so most of it was him mentoring me. And so I think it'd be pretty cool to have him as a coach, a legit coach. Those are the two names that come to mind right away. And the two of you, of course.
Maybe I'll ask this other question. Rich, what is it about, someone like Andy? What is it about him as a coach that makes you go, this is what I want from him?
Yeah. Somebody will ask you a question that just really makes you think in a completely different way that you weren't expecting. And when that happens, I mean, that's when it really opens up the magic of coaching. That's when you start to think through a problem or some issue you're dealing with in a just from a completely different perspective. So it's that good questioning, I think, that and I, when Christian Van Nieuwenberg, who wrote the book, I think it's Introduction to Coaching or Introduction to Coaching Skills, and it's on his third or fourth edition. He has videotapes that or video online that you can go look at as part of the book. And it's just watching him coach people. I thought, gosh, that guy's really good at it. I mean, obviously he wrote the book. So I think it's those good questions that really make a good coach.
Yeah, no, it's I had the privilege of because I live near West Point, I coached soccer for 20 years, and a lot of the folks that taught at West Point would come into our soccer league. We had a pretty active soccer league, so I'd co-coach with a few of the professors from there, and they were telling me like over the last 20 years how the relationships in the military changed, right? From being able to go into a country and be a diplomat and be a community builder and be a,
Yeah.
and I'm interested in the leadership work that you do. Does that come up? Is that important?
I get asked a lot of questions about my overseas service, the time in Iraq and Afghanistan, how you handle those tough situations. I don't know that I've ever been asked about the changing role of the military since 9/11. Although I brought it up. I mean, it there as part of what we do, we try to bring in real world examples of where the Army leadership principles have worked and where we've applied them, and frankly, where they haven't worked. And so, if you can pull a great example from real life, that's always helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I think it's like my admiration for the military is incredibly high, and how difficult those roles are. So I appreciate you sharing that.
So, yeah,
Uh,
go ahead, Dave.
so what resources would you recommend, Rich, for people to develop as coaches?
Yeah, David, thank you. I think, besides the book, I mean, that is the one book I would recommend. There's so many amazing books out there, and they're all good. There's great podcast, obviously this one. There's others on coaching specifically, and I think folks can find those themselves. But if I had to think of two resources that have helped me the most develop as a coach, the first one is a coaching questions bank. I mean, I think every coach ought to create some repository somewhere where they collect good questions, because you can find good questions everywhere. I There are companies that have 548 best coaching questions, and I'll save that in there. And then I subscribe to some newsletters. There's a guy named Sahil Bloom who writes the Curiosity Chronicle, and it's more about living your best life. But he every once in a while he'll throw something in there that I think, oh my gosh, that's an amazing coaching question, and I'll save it to an Evernote document that I have. James Clear, the habits guy, his email newsletter has every once in a while a really good question that is not he's not pitching it as a coaching question, but it would make an amazing coaching question, and it would, what we talked about, make you think differently about a situation that that catches you off guard, get you out of your own way, and so you can find the answers within yourself. And so as I stumble across great coaching questions, I add them to my coaching bank, and so I keep that on, like I said, on Evernote. So that's the first. I think every coach ought to start collecting good coaching questions. They make it, and by the way, it makes a great document to go back and review right before you get on a coaching call. Just if you can't figure out how to get in the zone, I go read this list of questions, and it just gets my mind in the coaching zone. So I do a better job for the client. The second thing I think is just having a community of other coaches that you can lean on and ask questions. I'm really fortunate that my cohort that went through the coaching course with me, we just seem to click and connect. We started a WhatsApp chat, and we've all gotten very close. And we meet on Zoom about once a quarter. We get together just to catch up and see what everybody's up to, and just talk. And so, anytime somebody in the cohort has an issue, where do I get insurance? Have you all ever dealt with this situation? Have you ever used this model in a coaching session? They throw it into the chat and we all answer it. And that's been extremely helpful. And so those are the two things I think every coach ought to have: a repository of questions and a great community of peer coaches that they can lean on to get advice.
I think one thing that you kind of bring up, Rich, that I think is really, besides the process of coaching, there's the business of coaching. And I can't be, without, I can't just expect, I'm just going to crank out all this great coaching without understanding that there's the business side that I have to actually tend to it. And actually, my coach actually recently said, you have to determine if this is a business or a hobby. If it's a hobby, then you can actually not tend to the business. Because it's just something that's more haphazard, or you won't be, willing to actually expend the resources to get good, or to stay good, or to sharpen that, saw on a regular basis. Yeah. So, I think, what, that's interesting that, it's the business side that's my reflection. of like always sharpening yourself with better questions. And then
Yeah.
that would be an avenue through which you could get in the zone, is to just, because I know like I have to be willing to actually look at some of those questions and answer them for myself.
Oh
At,
yeah, that's
at
good.
least then I know that if I ask it, I've asked it myself, and it's not just some,
Yeah.
super insightful question into the situation. So that's my reflection. So I really appreciate those. Dave, how about you? What's your reflection?
Yeah, my reflection is some of the foundational pieces of being a good coach and listening and asking questions. And also, like, as the stakes get higher, the importance of a sense of humor, right? There's no higher stakes than when you're in the military, and, and we take it very serious in business, right? Sometimes we take ourselves too seriously. So the importance of a sense of humor to make things human is such an important part of being an effective coach. So I appreciate you sharing that with
Mm.
us, Rich.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that because every once in a while, it happens actually quite often in a leadership development seminar setting. Somebody will say, oh, well, we're just such, it's stakes are so high and we're so fast paced. And I don't even have to say anything. I just kind of look at them, kind of cock my head to one side and kind of give them a, like, really? And they say, okay, I get it. We're selling we're selling pharmaceuticals. We're not going to war. But it knocks them back a second and makes them think, okay, wait a minute. We are not, this is not life and death stakes. This is not national security existential. It's important. It matters. It's vital to somebody's life, but let's keep it in perspective. And so I agree with you 100%. We got to keep it life in perspective.
Rich, where can we? Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just going to say, how would you like people to learn more about you, get in touch with you, learn more about the leadership programs and coaching you offer?
Yeah, no, great. If they want to learn more about Thayer Leadership, which is where I do all my executive and leadership coaching through, as well as the programs we run, it's at ThayerLeadership.com, THAYER, named after Colonel Sylvanus Thayer, who is the father of the U.S. Military Academy. He was the superintendent back in the early 1800s and really set the standard for leadership and created the military academy we know today. So ThayerLeadership.com to find out, and they can find me on there. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. I'm not picky. I don't screen people that much. I probably should, but I don't. And so, yeah. So I'm Rich Gross on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find.
Yeah, really great. Thanks, Rich, for spending the time with us. We really do appreciate it. I think when I met you last year, I think that was
At the Thayer Hotel,
yeah,
actually, in a
and
program.
a mutual friend, Todd Guile, said you should talk to Rich,
Yep.
and so really appreciate Todd for putting us together. And yeah, it's been really wonderful to get to spend time with you. And so yeah.
Well, and thank y'all. It really is, and I'm not just saying this. It's an honor to be asked to be on the podcast. It means a lot. It's a nice affirmation that I'm heading in the right direction, if you will, and what I do matters, and so I appreciate that. And it's actually been a lot of fun talking to y'all.
Next time you're in the neighborhood at West Point, happy to come to the hotel, because if I remember correctly, they have really good coffee at the Thayer Hotel.
It's not bad.
That I would have. I mean, just to end it with a note from our sponsor. Are you feeling stuck or overwhelmed? Character Matters Coaching and Consulting provides leadership coaching and consulting to empower you to overcome obstacles and reach your full potential. Visit charactermatters.us.com to learn more about their transformative coaching and how you can get connected to Matt for your organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.